Hello and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Geringer and I'm the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And today we're going to have an episode focused in on sort of what are some of the thoughts and things you should be working through, especially if you're leasing your property out for hunting. I recognize that if you were going to do this, you probably would have done this much earlier in the year, but this is something that many people may be thinking about doing, and many landowners may want to bring in some side income by doing this. And it is not always the easiest process to where we have to think about a different set of circumstances than what we may be used to in the ag context. But I do want to go through all of those that, people may have. Hunting leases can be a powerful tool for farmers looking to reduce deer populations, limit deer damage to crops, and provide the landowners with additional income. Whatever reasons you have for wanting to lease your land out for hunting, it's always good to have a written lease that protects both parties. That's something we need to think about and make sure that we limit your liability. Before we can look at issues to consider in drafting your hunting lease, I do want to direct you to resources that exist to assist you in drafting your own hunting lease. With University of Maryland Extension, Jonathan Kay's Extension Specialist Natural Resources has a short and long form hunting lease available in his publication, Landowner Liability and Recreational Access. Tiffany Dow-Leschmet, the legal specialist with Texas AgriLife Extension, has a publication on developing a hunting lease checklist that's available online. All this will be in the show notes, by the way. And the post that I'm taking this from originally that I did will be down there as well. For those who just want permission to hunt on a specific property with no lease, in Maryland, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources has a permission to hunt form available that you can use. Remember that the hunter has to keep that on them at all times. There are also sample hunting leases available through a number of other sources that are in the publication that I put together that will be in the show notes that you can go back and look at as well. One thing to remember when using a sample lease or any sample legal document, that document was created how the drafter thought a lease should look generally. That this means it may not work in every situation. Talk to an attorney to have the lease drafted that fits your needs. That's one thing to always think about to make sure that you're best protecting yourself in these relationships. So as you start to develop your lease, you should always consider the following issues in it. What's the property being leased? Will you be leasing all of your property or portion of it? Be specific to be exact with the property you will be leasing. Use legal descriptions when possible. Utilize an aerial photography of the property. Draw out the boundaries on that so we know what we're talking about and people know what's going to be done. If you have, what's the rental rate you're going to be charging? If you've leased, agricultural land before, setting the right rental rate is important. With hunting leases, it can be equally important. Hunting leases can be per acre, per animal, per person, per year, or another form. Talk to other neighbors about what they charge if they are leasing land for hunting to determine what's a good rental rate in the area. We haven't done surveys recently to figure out what this would be in the various regions of the state. But it's something, if your neighbors are doing it, talk to them to get a sense of what the going rate would be. Charging a rental rate to hunt on the property will take the landowner out of the protections that exist within Maryland's recreational use statute, which limits a landowner's liability when the landowner allows a user to access the property for recreational purposes for free. There are exceptions, such as when you take a share of game caught on the property. You can better understand this by looking at Jonathan's publication, and in my post, I linked to another publication from Maryland to help you better understand this. This is an area where having a good attorney draft this for you, because they can make sure that if it is the game portion you are taking, that you can work it to make sure you fall under the recreational use statute to still have those protections, as well. What are the uses of the property? Will you be allowing the leasee to bring on additional parties? Will you cap that number? Will you allow them to use ATVs? What happens if gates are left open? Can the leasees use any buildings on the property? Should animals be cleaned in a specific area? This would be a big deal if you live on the property and do not want to see an animal being cleaned near your house, or you have someone that lives in the house that may be offended by this and not want to see that. These are things you should think about and where you want that to be taking place. Will leasees be able to construct improvements on the property, i.e., basically put up a deer stand? What can they put up? What form should that take? Take a moment to consider the answers to these questions as you draft your hunting lease. Liability insurance and release from liability. Accidents can happen, even with the most experienced hunter, the most experienced person. With that in mind, as a landowner, you should consider requiring the hunter leasee to have liability insurance during the life of the lease. Landowners may want to also require language in the lease releasing the landowner from liability and indemnifying the landowner, especially if the hunter is bringing other people on the property. This may be necessary in some cases. We have additional information in the post if you're curious about that as well. Make sure they're abiding by state and federal laws. On the same note, you may also want to consider including language in the lease that the leasee is to follow applicable state and federal laws. If this is not done, then the leasee could be considered in breach of the lease, especially if they're violating a state law as they do it. Safety practices, think about those. What are there areas of your property that you do not want guns shot at? Do you want the leasee to follow certain safety practices? These are things to consider. If you're living on the property, you may want to restrict gun usage in the direction of your home, barns, and other equipment. Do you want to retain the right to hunt yourself? Do you also want the right to hunt on the property? That's something you have to think about. Make sure you retain the right if you and your family members also enjoy to use the property for hunting or fishing or whatever it might be. Consider if you want to set limits on when you or the leasee can use the property. Again, if you do all this, it's going to impact the rental rate. You have to take that in consideration. For example, if we go back to, limiting when they can use a property, they may get the first day of season and you get the second day, and then they get every day after that, or, you alternate days. Just depends. Take that into consideration and think about it. But if you're renting it out, you probably may not want to hunt it. You're thinking about something else. How are disputes resolved in this? Add in some sort of dispute resolution clause. Consider adding language that requires the use of alternative dispute resolution that have to be utilized before going to court. The language could potentially limit costs and provide some quick resolve of any disputes that happen. The final thing that we always like to tell people as attorneys is just make sure you think about putting in an attorney's fee clause in the thing. Generally a party bringing a successful lawsuit, especially in this case with a lease, they don't get attorney's fees from the losing party unless there's a statute or a contract authorizing this. Consider doing this just so if there is a dispute and you do have to go to court, whoever wins will at least get their attorney's fees paid. These are some thoughts, on things. You'll see other thoughts in the other documents listed. Remember to utilize, some sort of checklist, some sort of document to sort of pull your thoughts together to help you draft this lease as you go along. If you have any questions on this or anything else, please let me know. You can email me at lgoering@umd.edu. Or you can tweet me, find me on Instagram, send me a message on either one of those platforms at AgLawPaul. If you have ideas for topics we should be covering on the podcast, please let me know. Thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.